5. He lived a scant 2 years with his wife, and they had a son. At the divorce proceedings, the judge awarded the infant to its mother and ordered Tomasz to pay a third of his salary for its support. He also granted him the right to visit the boy every other week. But each time Tomasz was supposed to see him, the boy's mother found an excuse to keep him away. He soon realized that bringing them expensive gifts would make things a good deal easier, that he was expected to bribe the mother for the son's love. He saw a future of quixotic attempts to inculcate his views in the boy, views opposed in every way to the mother's. The very thought of it exhausted him. When one Sunday the boy's mother again cancelled a scheduled visit, Tomasz decided on the spur of the moment never to see him again. Why should he feel more for that child, to whom he was bound by nothing but a single improvident night, than for any other? He would be scrupulous about paying support. He just didn't want anybody making him fight for his son in the name of paternal sentiments. Needless to say, he found no sympathizers. His own parents condemned him roundly. If Tomasz refused to take an interest in his son, then they, Tomasz's parents, would no longer take an interest in theirs. They made a great show of maintaining good relations with their daughter-in-law and trumpeted their exemplary stance and sense of justice. Thus, in practicality, no time he managed to rid himself of wife, son, mother, and father. The only thing they bequeathed to him was a fear of women. Tomasz desired but feared them. Needing to create a compromise between fear and desire, he devised what he called erotic friendship. He would tell his mistresses the only relationship that can make both partners happy is one in which sentimentality has no place and neither partner makes any claim on the life and freedom of the other. To ensure that erotic friendship never grew into the aggression of love, he would meet each of his long-term mistresses only at intervals. He considered this method flawless and propagated it among his friends. The important thing is to abide by the rule of threes. Either you see a woman 3 times in quick succession and then never again, or you maintain relations over the years but make sure that the rendezvous are at least 3 weeks apart. The rule of threes enabled Tomasz to keep intact his liaisons with some women while continuing to engage in short-term affairs with many others. He was not always understood. The woman who understood him best was Sabina. She was a painter. "The reason I like you," she would say to him, "is you are the complete opposite of Kish. In the kingdom of Kish, you would be a monster." It was Sabina he turned to when he needed to find a job for Teresa in Prague. Following the unwritten rules of erotic friendship, Sabina promised to do everything in her power, and before long she had in fact located a place for Teresa in the dark room of an illustrated weekly. Although her new job did not require any particular qualifications, it raised her status from waitress to member of the press. When Sabina herself introduced Teresa to everyone on the weekly, Tomasz knew that he had never had a better friend as a mistress than Sabina. Six. The unwritten contract of erotic friendship stipulated that Tomasz would exclude all love from his life. The moment he violated that clause of the contract, his other mistresses would assume inferior status and become ripe for insurrection. Accordingly, he rented a room for Teresa and her heavy suitcase. He wanted to be able to watch over her, protect her, enjoy her presence, but felt no need to change his way of life. He did not want word to get out that Teresa was sleeping at his place, spending the night together was the corpus delicti of love. He never spent the night with the others. It was easy enough if it was at their place. He could leave whenever he pleased. It was worse when they were at his and he had to explain that come midnight he would have to drive them home because he was an insomniac and found it impossible to fall asleep in close proximity to another person. Though it was not far from the truth, he never dared to tell them the whole truth. After making love, he had an uncontrollable craving to be by himself. Waking in the middle of the night at the sight of an alien body was distasteful to him. Rising in the morning with an intruder repellent. He had no desire to be overheard brushing his teeth in the bathroom, nor was he enticed by the thought of an intimate breakfast. That is why he was so surprised to wake up and find Teresa squeezing his hand tightly. Lying there looking at her, he could not quite understand what had happened. But as he ran through the previous few hours in his mind, he began to sense an aura of hitherto unknown happiness emanating from them. From that time on, they both looked forward to sleeping together. I might even say that the goal of their love-making was not so much pleasure as the sleep that followed it. She especially was affected. Whenever she stayed overnight in her rented room, which quickly became only an alibi for Tomasz, she was unable to fall asleep. In his arms she would fall asleep no matter how wrought up she might have been. He would whisper impromptu fairy tales about her or gibberish words he repeated monotonously, words soothing or comical, which turned into vague visions lulling her through the first dreams of the night. He had complete control over her sleep. She dozed off at the second he chose. While they slept, she held him as on the first night, keeping a firm grip on wrist, finger, or ankle. If he wanted to move without waking her, he had to resort to artifice. After freeing his finger, wrist, ankle from her clutches, a process which, since she guarded him carefully even in her sleep, never failed to rouse her partially, he would calm her by slipping an object into her hand, a rolled-up pajama top, a slipper, a book, which she then gripped as tightly as if it were part of his body. Once, when he had just lulled her to sleep, but she had gone no farther than the dream's antechamber and was therefore still responsive to him, he said to her, "Goodbye, I'm going now." "Where?" she asked in her sleep. "Away," he answered sternly. "Then I'm going with you," she said, sitting up in bed. "No, you can't. I'm going away for good," he said, going out into the hall. She stood up and followed him out, squinting. She was naked beneath her short nightdress. Her face was blank, expressionless, but she moved energetically. He walked through the hall of the flat into the hall of the building, the hall shared by all the occupants, closing the door in her face. She flung it open and continued to follow him, convinced in her sleep that he meant to leave her for good, and she had to stop him. He walked down the stairs to the first landing and waited for her there. She went down after him, took him by the hand, and led him back to bed. Tomasz came to this conclusion. Making love with a woman and sleeping with a woman are two separate passions, not merely different, but opposite. Love does not make itself felt in the desire for copulation, a desire that extends to an infinite number of women, but in the desire for shared sleep, a desire limited to one woman. 7. In the middle of the night, she started moaning in her sleep. Tomasz woke her up, but when she saw his face, she said, with hatred in her voice, "Get away from me! Get away from me!" Then she told him her dream. The two of them and Sabina had been in a big room together. There was a bed in the middle of the room. It was like a platform in a theater. Tomasz ordered her to stand in the corner while he made love to Sabina. Then the sight of it caused Teresa intolerable suffering. Hoping to alleviate the pain in her heart by pains of the flesh, she jabbed needles under her fingernails. "It hurts so much," she said, squeezing her hands into fists as if they actually were wounded. He pressed her to him, and she gradually, trembling violently for a long time, fell asleep in his arms. Thinking about the dream the next day, he remembered something. He opened a desk drawer and took out a packet of letters Sabina had written to him. He was not long in finding the following passage: "I want to make love to you in my studio. It will be like a stage surrounded by people. The audience won't be allowed up close, but they won't be able to take their eyes off us." The worst of it was that the letter was dated. It was quite recent, written long after Teresa had moved in with Tomasz. "So you have been rummaging in my letters?" She did not deny it. "Throw me out then." But he did not throw her out. He could picture her pressed against the wall of Sabina's studio, jabbing needles up under her nails. He took her fingers between his hands and stroked them, brought them to his lips and kissed them as if they still had drops of blood on them. But from that time on, everything seemed to conspire against him. Not a day went by without her learning something about his secret life. At first he denied it all. Then, when the evidence became too blatant, he argued that his polygamous way of life did not in the least run counter to his love for her. He was inconsistent. First he disavowed his infidelities, then he tried to justify them. Once he was saying goodbye after making a date with a woman on the phone, when from the next room came a strange sound like the chattering of teeth. By chance, she had come home without his realizing it. She was pouring something from a medicine bottle down her throat, and her hand shook so badly the glass bottle clicked against her teeth. He pounced on her as if trying to save her from drowning. The bottle fell to the floor, spotting the carpet with valerian drops. She put up a good fight, and he had to keep her in a straitjacket-like hold for a quarter of an hour before he could calm her. He knew he was in an unjustifiable situation, based as it was on complete inequality. One evening, before she discovered his correspondence with Sabina, they had gone to a bar with some friends to celebrate Teresa's new job. She had been promoted at the weekly from darkroom technician to staff photographer. Because he had never been much for dancing, one of his younger colleagues took over. They made a splendid couple on the dance floor, and Tomasz found her more beautiful than ever. He looked on in amazement at the split-second precision and deference with which Teresa anticipated her partner's will. The dance seemed to him a declaration that her devotion, her ardent desire to satisfy his every whim, was not necessarily bound to his person, that if she hadn't met Tomasz, she would have been ready to respond to the call of any other man as she might have met instead. He had no difficulty imagining Teresa and his young colleague as lovers, and the ease with which he arrived at this fiction wounded him. He realized that Teresa's body was perfectly thinkable coupled with any male body, and the thought put him in a foul mood. Not until late that night, at home, did he admit to her he was jealous. This absurd jealousy, grounded as it was in mere hypothesis, proved that he considered her fidelity an unconditional postulate of their relationship. How then could he begrudge her jealousy of his very real mistresses? 8. During the day, she tried, though with only partial success, to believe that Tomasz told her, and to be as cheerful as she had been before. But her jealousy, thus tamed by day, burst forth all the more savagely in her dreams, each of which ended in a wail he could silence only by waking her. Her dreams recurred like themes and variations or television series. For example, she repeatedly dreamed of cats jumping at her face and digging their claws into her skin. We need not look for an interpretation. In Czech slang, the word cat means a pretty woman. Teresa saw herself threatened by women, all women. All women were potential mistresses for Tomasz, and she feared them all. In another cycle, she was being sent to her death. Once, when he woke her as she screamed in terror in the dead of night, she told him about it. I was at a large indoor swimming pool. There were about 20 of us, all women. We were naked and hard to march around the pool. There was a basket hanging from the ceiling and a man standing in the basket. The man wore a broad-brimmed hat shading his face, but I could see it was you. You kept giving us orders, shouting at us. We had to sing as we marched, sing and do knee bends. If one of us did a bad knee bend, you would shoot her with a pistol and she would fall dead into the pool, which made everybody laugh and sing even louder. You never took your eyes off us, and the minute we did something wrong, you would shoot. The pool was full of corpses floating just below the surface, and I knew I lacked the strength to do the next knee bend, and you were going to shoot me. In a third cycle, she was dead. Lying in a hearse as big as a furniture van, she was surrounded by dead women. There were so many of them that the back door would not close and several legs dangled out. But I'm not dead, Teresa cried out. I can still feel. So can we, the corpses laughed. They laughed the same laugh as the live women who used to tell her cheerfully it was perfectly normal that one day she would have bad teeth, faulty ovaries, and wrinkles, because they all had bad teeth, faulty ovaries, and wrinkles. Laughing the same laugh, they told her that she was dead and it was perfectly all right. Suddenly she felt a need to urinate. You see, she cried, I need to pee. That's positive proof I'm not dead. But they only laughed again. Needing to pee is perfectly normal, they said. You'll go on feeling that kind of thing for a long time, like a person who has an arm cut off and keeps feeling it's there. We may not have a drop of pee left in us, but we keep needing to pee. Teresa huddled against Tomasz in bed. And the way they talked to me, like old friends, people who'd known me forever. I was appalled at the thought of having to stay with them forever.